and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We're going to continue today in terms of grief and bereavement, but we're going to take a little bit of a break and talk about how do you help a person who has just discovered that they have a terminal illness and they're not going to make it. You know, I've discovered something, and it's kind of a theory of mine, but my nephew was in a terrible motorcycle accident, which was not his fault, and he nearly died. And he had some time in a coma and a lot of time in rehab, and he's just coming to the point where he realizes that he may have disabilities. I have a friend of mine who had a major stroke, and she's been working on rehab for quite a while, doing well in it, and she's just come to the realization that she has some disabilities as a result of the stroke. Now, why am I telling you this? I think, and I've just discerned, and I may be wrong as well as right, I'm not trying to prove a point, but people that I know that have been injured or who are ill, they seem to be so wrapped up in their recovery process. I think their bodies are so wrapped up in their recovery process that they don't connect with the seriousness of it until they realize they've come to a point where they can go no further. And I suspect that this is true of many people who are ill. They'll be working toward their recovery and their bodies get wrapped up to it, and it's like it's a disconnect. They think they're going to be perfectly normal when they recover, that they're going to be able to take up life just exactly like they did before without any changes, and that things will be just the same as they were. And a lot of times they're not, because they're left with some lingering disability. I'm not saying that they have terrible disabilities, but some of them may. You can recover and recover and recover, but will you ever be exactly as you were before? I don't think the body connects with the fact that you may not be exactly what you were before. Now, if the injuries aren't that serious, yes, you could come back and be pretty much like you were before. However, what if it's a very serious illness, or what if it's a serious injury and it takes months to recover? Will you ever be like you were before? Well, maybe yes, and maybe no. It depends upon the injury. It depends upon what it takes from you. And the older you get, maybe the worse it is in terms of coming back to be exactly like you were before. So what about a person who's finally discovered that they have an illness and they're going to pass on with this illness and they're not going to be getting any better? That's a hard pill to swallow, because I think the normal thing is for the body to try to recover. And I think that's a normal thing. And I think you should try to recover. If wellness is your goal, and it is for most people, then you should try to recover. And you can get so wrapped up in the recovery process that you just don't connect with the fact that you may have either a mild or maybe a major disability due to the result of the injury or the illness. But we're talking here that if you know somebody that's dying, how do you deal with them? How do you talk with them? It needs to be talked about. People who are dying want to have a time where they can talk about it. They need to grasp it. They need to accept it. They need to deal with it in the best way that they can. And when people shy away from that because they're embarrassed, they don't know what to say, they're afraid they're going to make the person depressed or something, that's not a help. Because the person who is ill and is dying, they want to have people talk to them about it. And when we get to suicidology, we're not quite there yet, but when we get to suicidology, which we'll probably do within the next 2 or 3 sessions, people do want to have you talk about their thoughts about dying, because most of them haven't completely made up their minds that they want to do it, and they want to have a chance to sort it out and figure it out and talk about it and get it out in the open. And so talking about it does not make them commit suicide. If anything, it decreases the risk of suicide because they've had a chance to discuss it. And they may have had a good chance to decide to change their mind about it. And some of them weren't quite that solidly fixed on killing themselves anyway. They were searching it out like a decision. Now, people feel guilty when others commit suicide, but as I will explain later on, and I don't want to get into it too much now, suicide is a decision. And many of the people who commit suicide are not mentally ill. It was a rational decision that this is what they wanted to do, and these are the reasons why they wanted to do it. So to think of mental illness as the cause of all suicides, that's just not accurate, and it's just not the case. But more about that later. When you are dealing with somebody that you know is dying, you need to answer their questions, if they have any, to the best of your ability, to the level of knowledge that they have. You know, you don't have to spring everything on them, but at the same time, you need to answer their questions to their level of understanding, and you need to live as normal a life as possible. You shouldn't give up living a normal life because a person that you know has a terminal illness, and they wouldn't want it anyway. They need to be included in life as much as they can be, depending upon their situations. And you can live a normal life as well as you can, and not feel guilty and not feel that you're shortchanging the person who's dying, because you're not necessarily shortchanging them at all. They need to be included. Loved ones should talk about their approaching death, and the sick people want to talk about it because they want to have a chance to examine their fears and their feelings, and they don't want people to run away. You know, if I was sick and I was dying, I wouldn't want people to run away from me and not talk to me about it, or not talk to me at all because they're afraid of broaching it. Death, you see, is a part of life. It's the end stage of life. But if you believe there's an afterlife, and I do, that takes a lot of the fear away if you're in a good situation, because we all realize that life is not permanent, not on this earth at any rate. There is eternal life, but not on this earth. Now, sick people sometimes will try to withdraw because they tend to want to be alone. As people get sicker and sicker, they like the idea of being alone, but not to the point of not discussing things with them, but they like to be alone because they want to be alone with their thoughts. They want to digest this. They want to prepare. It's like their bodies are preparing for the ultimate. And when you are around sick people, be happy around them. Don't be morose. Don't be depressed. They need to pick up your vibes. They need to pick up normalcy. When my mother was dying, she was in a coma. She'd had a massive stroke. And the family all gathered around. And we stayed for hours at a time by her bedside. But it was a pleasant experience. We joked with each other. We talked with each other. We laughed. And I'm sure that hearing being the last thing to go, my mother was aware of all of this, and she was listening in. How much she understood, I don't know. But one of the things my mother always wanted, she wanted her family to be together. She just loved it. When nieces and nephews and cousins and everybody just kind of showed up for a dinner or Thanksgiving meal or Christmas, she was in seventh heaven. She just loved it. She wanted everybody around. She wanted her children around. She wanted her grandchildren around. And so at the time of her death, when she was just in kind of the last stage coma, everybody was there talking and laughing. They brought snacks. They talked with each other. The children had toys with them to play with. And if she was aware of all of this, and I really believe to a certain extent she was, it is something that she would have really loved to see. And of course they talked with her. She couldn't respond, but they talked with her as well, asking her how she was, patting her, giving her a hug. This is normal kinds of behavior towards somebody that is going to be dying, and it's a healthy way to do it because the person is included and they're not left out. So you may resent, as a human being, giving extra time to the person who's dying because of your own schedule. But what we tend to do in our busy lives is put our schedule ahead of people. And that's a big mistake. We shouldn't do that. Now, I understand there are schedules we have to keep. There are things we have to do. But we need to make time for those of us in our families that need that extra touch, that need that extra visit because of things going on in their lives. And we need to not be afraid of that. We shouldn't feel guilty because we can't spend as much time as we want, but we shouldn't run away from it either. We shouldn't be anxious about it. This is just a part of normal family life. And so what people are afraid of if they're with a person who's dying, and if they're kind of like watching them, making sure they're all right. They're afraid that emergency will happen, and they're not sure what to do in an emergency. I know I used to kind of sit with a lady who was very elderly and very sick, so her family could take time off every Saturday night. They used to go out to dinner, maybe a movie, and I used to stay with this person because she couldn't be left alone. They didn't want her left alone, and we would talk together. But sometimes you would be afraid. What if something happens? What if she has a stroke? What if she has a seizure? What do you do? Well, you call 911 if necessary. You have a way to get in touch with the family. If you're babysitting in a way, you have a chance to get in touch with them, so if anything happens, they can come home. Nothing did happen. Everything was fine. And this went on for quite a while, and it gave a family a break. And it's still, the person was covered, and the person had somebody with her and was not alone. So all kinds of arrangements have been made. So you need to make sure that you have time for yourself, time for your family, but also time with a person who is going to be passing on, that they don't feel alone and that they don't have to feel guilty that they're keeping you from something else. Life can go on as normally as possible, and that's the best way to handle it. Now, I want to go into the tasks of grieving. What is accomplished by the grieving process? Is there something good that can come out of it? Well, obviously, there is something good that can come out of it, because for some reason it can be a learning experience, a growing experience, and it can be helpful. But what are the tasks that the dying person needs to accomplish, and how can they accomplish it? And how can people assist the dying person with what they need to accomplish? So what I'm going to do is go into the tasks and see what people need and what they should be doing or what they will be doing as they approach their own deaths. Well, the biggest thing, of course, is they need to learn to accept their illness, and this is going to be hard to do. Nobody wants to accept the fact that they're ill. No one wants to accept the fact that they may not be living very much longer. Some people, it doesn't bother so much. I found with my experience just in dealing with people that the people who are least afraid of dying are the people who are dying. The people who are most afraid of it are the people that'll be left behind. Because what have they got to lose? Well, they've got to lose the one that they love. They've got to learn to live without the person that they love. If the person that they love kind of held the family together, was kind of a matriarch or patriarch of the family, they've got to do something else in order to have the family function. And so there may be a whole set of problems that come up because a person has passed on. What does a wife do if she doesn't take care of the bills, but her husband does, but her husband has passed on? How does she learn to take care of herself? How does she learn to take care of her family? What about a woman who has 2 or 3 young children, but her husband is in the service? He gets killed in warfare, and now she's a young widow with 3 children, very young, and she has to support them, take care of them, and be the breadwinner, and be the mom, and be the dad, and be everything. You see, I think sometimes this country doesn't treat its veterans very well. They don't treat the people who are survivors of a veteran passing very well. You're more or less on your own, and I've heard all kinds of complaints about that. And it shouldn't be that way. If a person's in the military or a person's in the fire department or police force, they should be surrounded by people to take care of them and to help them through the transition. And I notice it does go along in a very good way with the fire and the police department, so you see that on television all the time. But you just have to be aware that that people need help, and you have to support them. Excuse me for a moment. Okay, so these are the tasks for the person who is dying. They have to accept their illness. Now, what are they going to go through while they're accepting their illness? They're going to go into shock. no one wants to know they have a terminal illness, and you go through a period of shock where it seems unreal. Nothing seems real to you, and like it can't be, but it is, but it shouldn't be, or how can it be because I don't believe it is, and all kinds of things, the mixed feelings, the mixed emotions. It's a part of a shock reaction, and there is a certain amount of time when that shock happens, and then you start to feel numb, not quite real, but there, you're real, but you're not real. Things just don't make sense to you. Then you may go through a sense of denial. I know I'm not that sick. I feel good. I know I'm not dying. And you get that battle of I can't accept this. I won't accept this. It can't possibly be true. And then a gradual acceptance of the fact, yes, I have a terminal illness. Yes, I only have 3 months to live, according to the doctors. Now, I know doctors can be wrong, and people can outlive a lot longer than what the doctor says they can, partly by their own choice, because they kind of deny their bodies the right to the inevitable being death. So you get the shock, the numbness, the denial, and the gradual acceptance. Now, what does a person need? If you are watching a person go through all of this, say it's your parent or your loved one or a relative, what do? What do they need? Well, what they need is a caring presence and practical help and spiritual comfort. You can be there for them as they're going through this. You're not making judgments. You're not giving a lecture. This is not the time where you teach about what's going to happen at death and how they should be accepting of it. You are there just to comfort them, to be with them, let them know that you're there as they're going through all of that. They don't want a lecture. They just want to be heard. They just want to have somebody around that they can turn to if they want to. If they have questions, they want their questions answered. So it's more your presence that can help. Sometimes if you talk too much. And it's not necessary. It's better to be with them and stay with them and be with them, and they know that your presence is there, and that's the most important thing that you can do. I remember when my brother died, there was a pastor friend of mine, a female friend, and she was just terrific. She stood beside me. That's all she did. She didn't say a word. I moved 3 feet. She moved 3 feet. She stood right beside me no matter where I was. After the funeral was over and we went back to the house, and there was lunch, of course, wherever I went, there she was. She tagged me and stayed with me, and I really appreciated that. Her presence was a big help. She didn't say anything. She didn't make any statements. She just stayed close, and that was the best that she could do, and that was actually the best that anyone could have done. You do not understand, unless you've been through this, and of course I think many of us have, how important it is to have somebody just be there. Not necessarily to talk, although to talk if you want to. Not necessarily to answer questions unless you have a question you want answered. Or nothing, and not idle chit-chat, but just the presence is there. That can be a very, very healing thing. So the presence needs to be there. And from a person who's kindly, from a person who cares, from a person who just wants to help out. Not from somebody that just happens to be there, but somebody who's invested in you, somebody who wants to see you well. That's very, very important. The presence is important. Now, the second task is that we have to go through the emotional pain of knowing that we're not going to be around. And this is a difficult thing. You have to experience that pain. And what do you have to work through if you're facing death? What's the kind of pain that you're going to experience? In addition to, or maybe instead of, the physical pain that might occur with the illness that you're suffering. Well, there might be guilt, there might be resentment, remorse, yearning, apathy, despair, anger, anxiety, the feeling of emptiness, depression, loneliness, panic, discrimination, disorientation, loss of clear identity, and physical symptoms. All of those things can be experienced. Not that they will all be experienced, but they can be experienced. You know, you might resent the fact that you're not going to be around. You might resent somebody else because you may blame them for your illness or your injury. Say you were in a car and the car veered off the road because the driver was drunk or something, and you were injured in the process. You might have anger against that person. You might have resentment against that person. The yearning is for life, life the way it used to be. Life is a healthy thing, and the despair of it's all over. The thing that characterizes despair is the fact that there's no hope. People feel despairing when they feel there is no hope. As long as there's hope for recovery, even if it'll be a long and difficult recovery, as long as there's hope for recovery, people will hang on to that and they'll work for it because they want to recover. And a healthy person emotionally is always going to want to recover, and the body is always going to try to recover because it was geared for that. You might have anger at a person, you might be very nervous, anxiety is not unusual, so I kind of am going through this again. Why would you feel these feelings? Loneliness, because who's walking this road except yourself? You are the one that's facing death. You are kind of walking this road. You can have people, support people with you, but you're the one who's going to be doing it. You're the one that's going to be passing over. And as I had a friend of mine, she was in her 80s, this was years ago, she said, you kind of walk that road alone because you have to be at that door when the time comes for you to pass over. No one's going to be passing over with you. They may be with you, but they're staying behind and you're going forward. That must be some kind of a difficult thing to face because at some point we all have to face it. You might be in a place of panic. You know, in World War II, Hitler, I just happened to think of this. When he was dying, it was found that he was terribly, terribly afraid. He kept thinking he was seeing demons, and he was just horrified, and he was terrified as he was dying. Now, did he see demons, or was he hallucinating? I don't know. I can't answer the question, but I've read books about it, how he responded when he knew that he was dying, that he had a horrible, horrible emotional time at death because he was seeing horrible things. Now, not everybody goes through all of that. But some people do go through things, and some people see heaven or think they see heaven. So we have different experiences at death, and I think maybe those experiences are partly formed by what kind of people we were in life. But that's just my theory, and I can be right or wrong. There is sometimes a loss of clear identity. Who am I? What am I here for? What happened to me in my life? I dealt with a person that I got fairly close to, and he just wanted to live to be 100 years old, and he kept saying, I've made deals with the devil to live until I'm 100 years old. Now, this is what he was saying, and I got to know him, and we were both working in different offices on a college campus, but we were both using the same photocopy machine, so I would run into him, and we would talk, so we got to be familiar with each other. And then later on, as he got sicker and sicker, he wrote me a letter, and he said, I don't know who you are. What kind of place did you have in my life? Who are you anyway? And he had no recognition of the fact that we'd been friends for several years. He just wrote me a letter. I'd sent him a couple of books, and because he liked to read. And he wrote me a letter, and he said, who are you? I don't understand. We must have met somewhere. So as he was dying, he lost his memory of who I was. And after that, I didn't make any clear contact with him again. He didn't live much longer after that. He lived to be about 76. and then he died. He had cancer. So at any rate, sometimes there's a loss of identity, and then there's the physical symptoms of the illness. So these are all the things you have to work through. And the thing is, you work through them all at about the same time, because your body has to do what it has to do. Your body is beginning to shut down, and it's just a horrible thing, but you have to go through this. So all of those things, you have to really understand that pain and go through that emotional pain. And then after that, when you get to acceptance, you have relative peace. And a lot of people die very peacefully. Now I'm going to close it here because we don't have a lot of time left, and I'll continue with this next time because I'm not finished with it yet. And as we usually do, we've got the hotline, suicide hotline numbers and domestic violence hotline numbers for New Hampshire. Please take those down in case you or somebody else has a need. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.